Resume recording. Okay. The Khufu Boat Museum. It's in Giza. And guess where it's at? It's right behind the pyramid at Giza, the Khufu pyramid. And so this is a museum they built. And what's inside of it is this. And it's called a solar boat. And so what I need to do at this time for you, Emily, is so that you can know what's going on. I need to stop the recording. Oh, excuse me. Pause the recording. Come on. Oh, these things are just way too complicated. And the reason I got to change this out is this. Where's my drop down? More. Let's see. Pause, resume recording. Share screen. And this. So I wanted to show you that for a couple of reasons. One is that the Egyptians, and as early as King Khufu was buried 2500 BCE, they could build these massive boats. And as the professor said on this video, only every other culture we know of at the time were still building dugout canoes. And a dugout canoe means you make it out of one tree, you cut the tree down, you hollow out the middle, you make the sides a little more, how should I say, so that it cuts through the water better, take off the bark and pare it down. But the Egyptians, they were all over the place. And this next chapter, ancient Aegean art. And we're going to roughly be in the same time period. This will go up to, I think, about 700 BCE, but we start out at 2500. And what happens here is that this culture arises with a lot of influence from Egypt, because the Egyptians are coming and they trade, they bring ideas with them and so on. And so this map here is a part of the Eastern Mediterranean, the northeast corner of the Mediterranean, and where it says Asia Minor over here, that is modern day Turkey. And this is modern day Greece. And this is the largest island in the Eastern Mediterranean, Crete. But we have all of these tiny islands, the Cyclades, and cultures arise there. And you can see this is just on the other side of the Mediterranean, due north of Egypt. And so there are some noteworthy places here. This Peloponnesus, this island here, the Peloponnesus island, actually is sort of the birthplace of what will become Greece. And they are kind of a warrior culture, if you will. And this town right here by my cursor, Sparta. You ever heard of Sparta? Still a big today. I mean, we're really in a time where a lot of things are directly connected to antiquity. And because this is a little more European, it's kind of found its way over to the US a little more. But yeah, how about this? Michigan State, the Spartans. And Sparta, actually, this is where it's at. They were a warrior culture, which is why you see on Michigan State's helmet, you got this Greek warrior with a helmet. That's their logo. They were fighters. And we also use Sparta in our language today. You may have run across this word Spartan, that you that you live a Spartan existence. Anybody ever heard that? No? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you something you never heard of. That really, the Spartan existence means that you get by on very little. You don't have a lot of creature comforts. Might even not even have a bed. You sleep on the floor. You get by for days without eating. You have a kind of a tough life. Well, that was how life was in Sparta. And there was a little method to the madness as well, because they were training all of their males from the time they were little boys to be warriors. And if you were athletic, if you could march all day long and get by with a couple hours sleep, and if you could get by without eating very much, you could sleep on the ground if necessary. Didn't have blankets, that's okay. That's a Spartan existence. And so Spartan kind of means roughing it. Put it in, simply put. And so anyway, there's some other places around here that we have here, Tiryns, which we'll see. And we won't talk, at least yet, about these other places in Greece, because that's where we're going next. But we see over here, we have a lot of tiny islands. The big one, Crete. And one of the big discoveries is this. This is the Knossos, and it's the palace at Knossos. And you can see this is a sarcophagus, and it's painted. You know what a sarcophagus is? Pardon? Ah, no. It's a casket. It's a tomb. It's something smaller than a big pyramid, but it's something a little more than just digging a hole and throwing a dead body in. The sarcophagus is a container for a dead person, and it usually represents some level of wealth or status. And so this is a sarcophagus. We'll see this in Etruscan cultures too. And typically what it's decorated with is some indication of what this person's life was like. And sometimes we'll find it, the Etruscan culture, which comes up after Greece, is that sometimes perhaps a husband and wife will be both interred in a single sarcophagus. And so that's what this is. This is a burial tomb. And you see, it's all painted. It's on a single register, a frieze, if you will. And it's kind of Egyptian-like, at least in the way that it tries to tell the story here. Style is a little different. And we'll talk about that. But I'm going to go back now. Cycladic islands, Cyclades. That's those little islands that's north of Crete. Figurine of a woman. And when people were finding these, and a lot of them have been found now, bottom line is that people were really kind of excited about this because it fits a category that we haven't really seen too much of. It's pretty abstract, if you will. We've been talking about naturalism a lot, and that the Egyptians had a particular kind of naturalism, although it was highly symbolic as well because everybody was painted in profile and they were stacked and there were scales of you were bigger. If you were bigger, you were more important, stuff like that. But these were really quite abstract. They're almost geometric. This almost looks like it could have been made in the 20th century in the Western world. And this is really what excited a lot of people when they started finding this Cycladic sculpture. And you could see, like Khufu, this is 4,500 years old. And it's marble and it's real tiny. It's a figurine. It's not an entire big sculpture. It's 18 inches, maybe. And so here's another Cycladic sculpture made of marble, 9 inches high, even smaller, but he's seated. The harp player from Keros, one of the Cycladic islands. And again, look at it's like kind of, it's almost Picasso-like in how it's simplified. And if you would take this head, this looks like it, like I say, comes out of 20th century, early 20th century sculpture with the likes of Julio Gonzalez or Modigliani or Picasso or Brancusi or a lot of them. And so this is really pretty interesting, just for stylistic purposes. And it does tell you something else too. Tells you that they had music. He's a harp player. We saw that all the way from ancient Mesopotamia. The bull's head, harp. And so, yeah, stringed instruments, it's really part of the culture that persists from Mesopotamia to Egypt, through the Aegean, through all the way till today. We have our own versions of this, like with frets and a pickup and an amp. Look, Jimi Hendrix going. Still the same principle. It's just you pluck strings, you tighten the strings, you get higher notes, you loosen them, you get lower notes. This is amazing that it goes back this far. But at any rate, this is Cycladic art, and I put a star by it because it's really kind of a unique style of art that we hadn't seen after that, and we really haven't seen before that. And so what we have here on the north shore of Crete is this place, Knossos. It's on Crete, and we have it nailed down to 1700 to 1370 BCE. And it was discovered in the early 20th century. We didn't know it was even there. And part of the reason we didn't know it was there is that it was kind of like Pompeii. You guys know about Pompeii? We'll take a look at it here. It's actually on a Google commercial.
Oh, sorry.
talk about Mount Vesuvius erupting 79 AD, all of that stuff. Anyway, this was kind of a similar sort of thing, but this was not destroyed by a volcanic eruption. We think it was destroyed by an earthquake and a subsequent tsunami that came in, the big wall of water. It's right there on the North Shore. Lots of seismic activity in this part of the world. Go to the west, we still have like Pompeii, we still have a lot of volcanoes to the west, and to the east in Turkey, in Iraq, Iran. They still have earthquakes, actually quite frequently. It's an area where there's a lot of seismic activity. So that's the theory. And that they all got wiped out, and because they all got wiped out, people forgot about it for a couple, 2 or 3 millennia. And so anyway, this is a restored view, and it's based on what we know, what we've unearthed. I want to point something here that's really kind of another thing unique to this part of the world. We see columns holding up everything. Well, we've seen that before. We've seen that in a lot of places, actually. And that's called hypostyle. That's the architectural plan. Hypostyle, you put columns to hold up the weight of all of this stuff. And around the perimeter will be columns, and in the middle of all of this will be columns. But unique to the palace at Knossos is that they're red. We don't know why. It's a variation on a theme. And here's the floor plan. So you can see it was really quite elaborate. We're still reconstructing some of it. We're still unearthing much of it. But here is a stairwell from the palace at Knossos and the red columns, hypostyle. Now because we have such a good, well-preserved, not entirely well-preserved, but a reasonably well-preserved palace here, we can kind of figure out a lot about the culture. We got evidence here. And they threw this in, La Parisienne, Minoan woman or goddess. So they call this piece of a fresco La Parisienne, which means woman from Paris. And they named her that because that's how a lot of things were done in archaeology a long time ago. We'd always kind of name things based on current history, current frame of reference. And when this was found, they saw how beautiful she was. She's got lipstick, eyeliner. She's got this really fancy dress. Her hair is well done. And the archaeologists, people who found it, said, oh, she looks like she could have come right from Paris. At the time, Paris was like the center of high fashion. And so that's why it's got that in parentheses. The other part I want to bring to your attention is the word Minoan. And we'll talk about the palace at Knossos, and the culture itself we call Minoan. And we call it Minoan because we know that King Minos lived there, M-I-N-O-S, and the whole thing is named after King Minos. And we also know because the Greeks were very good at writing things down. They actually wrote a lot of history. And they wrote history about King Minos. Of course, because we never found the palace and stuff. A lot of that was considered to be a myth. And there's a lot of stuff from Greek literature. When they found Minos, when they found this culture, Minoan culture, they really thought it might be Atlantis, the lost continent of Atlantis, which is something that's actually mentioned in ancient Greek writing as well. And so anyway, I say all of that. The history is incomplete, but we kind of have a picture of what happened. And this is from the palace here. I think Minoan culture is really, in its own way, kind of important. It's important chronologically, and in terms of civilizations, it's a kind of a link between Egypt and what happens in Europe, Greece and Rome. And I think a lot of the stuff that they did persist to this day. This is a fresco from the palace at Knossos, and it's called bull leaping. Make that out. What we got here is a big old bull, and we have somebody in front and somebody in back, and we have this character leaping the bull. And so what we figure, most authorities agree on this, is that this was like a sport. And we find a lot about sports and games from cultures that have kind of been lost to us. Like in Incan ruins, we kind of know about a game they played. Anyway, we know about this, and we know about the bull leaping because that picture. And I say, this is my own theory, but I say this had a profound and lasting influence on European culture. So can you think of any parallels to bull leaping that exist today? Bull riding, exactly. This is like a rodeo from Wyoming or Montana. And it's very similar to that. And if you take a look at it, these guys could be the circuit or the rodeo clowns that are there to distract the bull and keep the bull leaping guy safe. Of course, in the American version, it's basically a guy trying to ride this thing. But the bull is a very dangerous animal. And so this is a very dangerous activity. And there are a lot of links in between rodeo and Minoan culture. For instance, the bullfight in Spain, that goes back centuries. And so bulls have been kind of part of the culture. Pamplona, running of the bulls. You guys ever see that? It's a thing they do in Spain, and they have a bunch of men out on the streets, and then they let all of the bulls loose, and these guys all run for their lives, not to get killed by these stampeding bulls. Weird ideas about sport, to be sure. But it tells us a lot about where this stuff comes from. And this is from the Cyclades, and this is a painted fresco landscape with swallows. And the swallows are these birds that are up here. And what you have here is basically a landscape with a lot of flowers and foliage. And this is a little different than things we've seen so far too, in that this does not really tell a story. doesn't show people harvesting the crops or fighting in battles. This looks like it's just there for beauty, for decorative purposes. And so we're seeing a lot of these things actually shift. And we start talking about the idea of beauty as an end in itself. This will persist through the Greek cultures. And here we go, miniature ships fresco. And this is why I showed you the solar boat. We have some evidence of larger ships and trading going on in the Aegean Sea. And we don't really know who owns these boats and stuff, but bottom line was a lot of seafaring activity. And we know there was a lot of trading, and we're finding artifacts that probably came from Egypt in this part of the world, and stuff that we think comes from this part of the world we're finding in Egypt. And so crocus gatherers, that's not what crocus are. Crocus? No. It's a flower. It's the first flower of spring. And they're related to daffodils and tulips, but the crocuses are only tiny. They're real tiny little flowers. They don't get much, don't get very tall, but they are the harbinger of spring. And that's really what these, see, they're not really that tall, these flowers. That's crocuses. And what we see out of this culture will persist too, in that they make pottery. And they decorate the pottery. And that's something that runs straight through Greek culture, becomes a large part. This is, I've thought about putting the star by this one. This is a flask, marine style octopus flask, and it's only 11 inches high, so it's kind of small. To me, I say it's shows some level of sophistication, and it kind of follows a lot of the rules we have in place for design. Some of the design principles that we still use today that you're probably going to run into in your classes in art here. And by having design principles, what I'm talking about is how this is, they talk about composition, for example, and the octopus's tentacles lead you in and around this composition, and they fill up this whole space. So there's not really like any dead space. There is some negative areas, and that's filled up with these little depictions of sea life, mostly seaweed, but occasionally like an urchin right here. And so this follows a design principle of using up all of the space and being aware, and composition of leading your eye and making all parts of your composition interesting. So anybody in here doing like taking design courses and stuff? Yeah. Would you agree with what I'm saying? Good. Because if you disagree, I start crying. Anyway, yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. I think that's wonderful. And there's something else here too that I always thought was actually quite interesting about how this octopus is depicted, and that is that the body here is really kind of in the center. And this is what you would call a radial composition, where you have the centerpiece and all of the other stuff comes out from that. Well, an octopus would, properly positioned, actually be very conducive to a radial composition. But the tentacles themselves, you would never see these suckers on the tentacles all exposed all at the same time. Just wouldn't happen. It's impossible. But the artist here actually painted all of them. And is there a design principle that a word you might apply to something like this? Repetition, yeah, rhythm and repetition, absolutely. Rhythm, repetition, and unity too. So this is, to my mind, this is like one of the first things we've seen that actually puts together things in a way that we would put together things here in the 20th century. These are design principles that have been tried and true. And so anyway, I got to tell you, I was talking to one of the other adjunct professors, and she does an online class, and she teaches digital design. We were kind of talking back and forth about the importance of art history, of all things. And she thought, as I do, art history is invaluable. It is so important because if you can see what humankind has done, it opens up a lot of ideas that you can actually build. And we'll see a lot of that here, even though this is ancient. So anyway, the octopus blast. This is a strange object. It's kind of well known. It's a snake goddess from the palace at Knossos. And part of, I think, why it's so popular, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one is that it identifies a woman as being a person of power and influence in their culture. We've seen some cultures where women have been kind of marginalized. This woman, she looks like she'll put those snakes on you. Bottom line, she's fearless. She's got the snakes. Snakes have always had this kind of place in religion, mythology, going back to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, the serpent. It's been kind of a thing. Well, this is the snake goddess, and it's really quite well known and important piece. It's not that tall. It's only about 13 inches. And so anyway, we have different kinds of sculptures that come from this area. I only really have one thing to say about this, and that is this glass circular object. What you'll find a lot of times, sometimes if you got sculptures that have been damaged, sometimes you'll find people that'll fill in the damaged parts of what they think it was. In this case, not so much. They created this stand and put it to the approximately right height. And so you can see both pieces as we think they should have existed. And so Harvester's base from Crete, this is still, 1500 BC. And so we're going into Peloponnesia right now. And this is Tiryns, Greece. And this is the southern part, palace and southern part of the citadel. Citadel walls. You know what a citadel is? Basically, It's a fortress. And as I was saying earlier about Sparta and the warrior culture, that's really what arises. And so here is the aerial view of what's left of the citadel. You can see it has this big walled reinforcement, protective citadel. And then inside are all of the buildings and so on. And so this is in Tiryns, Greece, and we see it's 1400 BCE, moving more closely to the present. Warrior culture, and for whatever reason, these people seem to fight a lot. And so they had invented a few things too. One is the corbelled arch construction. And this is just an illustration. This is what it looks like. Corbelled vaulted gallery. And what we have here is an archway, but it's pointed. And that's a lot different. We've seen the post and lintel construction, which is kind of predominant. We've seen the invention of the archway, but this pointed arch, which is corbelled vaulting. We haven't seen that before. This is new. And this next, this is Lion's Gate, Mycenae, Greece, same part, Mycenaean culture, Spartan, etc. But this is a corbelled archway, but then they put this huge stone and turned it back into a post and lintel. But what's interesting here is that they were stonemasons. They were picking it up. I think by the fit, probably not as skilled as the Egyptians. The Egyptians were like high tech. But we do have, this is the Palace of Nestor. And this is a drawing. This is actually a watercolor of what we think the interior of the palaces in Peloponnnesia probably look like. A lot of speculation, but one thing is certain. They had hypostyle, which is the columns held up the building in the center, around the edges. Second thing is look at these patterns on the floor. And one of the things that emerges in Greek culture is geometric patterns. It becomes a big deal. And so that's really what this is. They're talking about ideas of design and unity and composition. Geometry can play a big part in putting things like that together. And so this is a treasury at Atreus. It's in Mycenae, and again, a corbelled vaulted archway. And this is what it looks like on the inside. Now, a treasury at Atreus kind of means what it says. It was a treasury. And if I back up a little bit, you see it's mostly underground. And again, you see, at least in early Greek culture, Mycenaean culture, a lot of their buildings they have the kind of built-in fortress quality, that they're made to be defended. They look like forts. They have outer perimeter walls, or they're buried underground, and so on and so on. And so this is a grave circle in Mycenae. And this next slide here, funerary mask. And this is from my series from Gray Circle A, and it's beaten gold. And so we think this was a very important person. Another thing that's been consistent, another version, but we've seen it, the death mask, a representation of an important person's face. Like I said, we've been doing that in the U.S. and in Western cultures up until really about 50 years ago or so. There's a death mask of John Dillinger, the bank robber, for example, Al Capone stuff. But anyway, it was beaten gold. You see, it's kind of naturalistic, and it's kind of symbolic, and it's actually, in some kind of ways, almost a little bit more stylized than natural. But, and we see here an inlaid dagger blade, the lion hunt. The lion actually becomes, and still is, it's a metaphor. And again, we're talking about southern Greece. We don't see lions there in this day and age, but we do know that big cats roam southern Europe and West Asia. The Vapio drinking cup. And so what you see, they become very skilled at metals. And that's probably the big takeaway. We don't see much done with metals until this point. When we were looking at the Khufu boat, no nails, no screws, no metallic fasteners. They put that together, all of the technology they had. They didn't have metal. They didn't put things together with metal. But by this time, we're getting into what's called the Iron Age and Bronze Age. And these people know how to use metal. And so we see gold in Egypt, death mask, and so on. But you got to know, too, that gold is real soft, and it's easily melted, and it's easily shaped. And so the funerary mask here, you can imagine that somebody with a hammer or a rock or something could actually shape this gold because it's soft. And so this is a crater. That's a kind of vessel it is. It's big. It's got a big mouth on the top, and it's got handles on the side. That's what a crater is. When we talk Grecian art, we'll look at the various shapes and styles. But what we have here is 1200 BCE, and we're a few hundred years past Knossos and Minoan culture. There's that warrior culture I've been talking about with Sparta, Mycenae, so on. And so, yeah, here they are. These are soldiers. They're in their battle gear. They got their weapons. And that is one of the main purposes in the culture, war. And so I have that, and so let me see, I gotta get another share going. And you still with me, Emily?
Yep.
Okay, good. I gotta get this going, share screen. So, Emily, you seeing this sculpture? Something going on here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. That's what I want to know. This is my final thought for the day. I talk about how a lot of these things that we study has an impact on things that go on today. The palace at Knossos and King Minos, there's a whole lot of mythology around this place. And one of the big myths, if you will, is that the king had a very ferocious, a very powerful beast that he kept in the basement of his palace. And this beast was half bull and half human. And it was called a minotaur. We're talking about Anubis being a head of a jackal or a wolf and a man's body. Well, this was a bull and a man. It wasn't just the head, it was the whole upper body was bull. And so that was the minotaur, and that had kind of in legend had oh, here we go. In legend, if you displeased the king, he would throw you down into the basement, and the minotaur would eat you up. This is a minotaur sculpture. And it was created by one of the professors at the University of Wisconsin while I was in graduate school. And he was an older guy, and he got funding for a project assistant, which was me. And I got paid, and I got tuition reduction. Anyway, what he needed was somebody to be able to cut all of this metal and put this thing together. This was his design. And it's a minotaur. So we have guys still creating images and sculptures from ancient myths. I showed you the Anubis and how that's kind of come into things. Minotaur. This sculpture, by the way, is in the National Sculpture Garden in Japan. And when we finished this, he took it over. They gave a big celebration. They installed his Minotaur, and they paid him 1 million yen. Except that wasn't as much as he thought it was. When he found out it was dollars, it was like $10,000. You know, just saying. But at any rate, it's still on. It's still today. It's still a source of inspiration. And so, any questions about the Aegean? I have that boat building video posted if you want to take a look at it on your own screen sometime. But you got the idea. They could build big boats. They could sail across the Mediterranean. They were an empire. And so we'll start looking at Greece when we come back Tuesday. In the meantime, have fun, be safe, stay cool. All that stuff. Just say no, don't drink and drive, don't text and drive. I got all kinds of rules, but I'll see you. Have a good weekend. Yes, sir. Yeah, I did. Quiz comes this time next week.
My advisor recommended that I ask the director of the honors program to do an extension for that, for the contract.
Okay.
If he approves of
Well,
that.
yeah, I think that's a good idea, and in part because of this.